I arrived in Paris with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The City of Lights, renowned for its art, culture, and romance, was my playground for the next 2 weeks. As a freelance photographer, I had come here to capture the essence of Paris through my lens, hoping to forget the relationship issues that had been plaguing me back home. The language barrier was a challenge, but I had picked up a few basic phrases on my last visit here. I was alone and was determined to make the most of this trip. I checked into a charming boutique hotel in the Marais district. The receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. "Bienvenue," he said, and handed me my room key. After unpacking, I grabbed my camera and set out to explore the city. My first stop was the Eiffel Tower, an obligatory photo for any visitor. I positioned myself to get the perfect shot when I noticed an old man in my peripheral vision. He was in his late 70s, with a gaunt face and piercing blue eyes. He stood there in the shadow, watching me intently. I dismissed it as a coincidence and moved on. Over the next few days, my plans were to lighten up and let go of my worries. I roamed the streets of Paris, capturing its beauty through my lens. Yet, no matter where I went, the old man was there. At the Louvre, he stood in the background of my shots. At Notre Dame, he watched from a distance. At Montmartre, he lingered by the artist's stalls. It was unsettling, but I convinced myself that he was just another tourist who happened to be visiting the same sites. One evening, after a long day of shooting, I returned to my hotel. The receptionist handed me a letter, saying it had been left for me. Confused, I opened it. The letter was written in elegant, old-fashioned handwriting. "My dearest Elise, seeing you again after all of these years fills my heart with joy. You haven't aged a day. I have watched you from afar, longing to be near you. Tomorrow, I will approach you and reveal myself. Until then, know that I love you eternally. I am sorry and pray you have forgiven me. Yours forever, Lucienne." A chill ran down my spine. Elise, that wasn't my name. And who was Lucienne? Panic set in as I realized the old man had been following me with a purpose. The next day, I decided to stay in my hotel room, but curiosity got the better of me. I needed answers. I ventured out to get a bite to eat and a breath of fresh air, and sure enough, he was there, waiting for me by the Seine. Gathering my courage, I walked past him, hoping to confront him. As I did, he reached out and gently touched my arm. "Elise," he whispered, his voice filled with longing. "It's me, Lucienne." I shot around so fast I had almost tripped and fell. "My name is not Elise," I replied, pulling away. "You must be mistaken." Looking into his face, I could sense something was off, horribly creepy. His face fell, and he looked at me with dark, sorrowful eyes. Screaming to the top of his lungs, he yelled, "You are her. I know you are. Please, Elise, remember me." I ran out of the museum, not stopping until I was back in my hotel room. I packed my bags and booked an early flight home, unable to stay in Paris any longer. When I returned to the US, I decided to visit my mother. We hadn't seen each other in years due to my constant travel and shitty boyfriend I recently broken up with. I felt a sudden need for the safety of family. As we sat in the living room, flipping through old photo albums, she had so many, it was hard to remember everyone in them. As my mother flipped through the old pages, she stopped on a picture of a young woman who looked strikingly familiar to me. "That's your great-great-aunt Elise," my mother said, her voice tinged with sadness. "She disappeared in Paris many years ago. They never found out what happened to her." A chill ran down my spine as I looked at the photograph. The resemblance was uncanny. I was the spitting image of Elise. Over dinner, I told my mother about the old man in Paris, and she grew pale. Your great-great-aunt was engaged to a man named Lucien. He was much older than her, and they say he went mad with grief when she vanished. For a long time, he was a suspect. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, and a sense of dread settled over me. The old man in Paris, Lucien, had mistaken me for my great-great-aunt Elise. He had been following me, convinced that I was his lost love returned. I tried to shake off the fear and move on with my life, but the experience left a lasting impression on me. Every time I picked up my camera, I couldn't help but feel a pair of eyes watching me, waiting for me to return to Paris. I decided to dig deeper into Elise's past. My mother and I scoured old letters, journals, and photographs. We discovered that she had traveled to France for a photography project just like me. She had met a man named Lucien who became obsessed with her. Lucien had written numerous letters to Elise, expressing his undying love. A few letters were written by Elise as well. At some point, she and this man had been dating, but when she finally rejected him, he became increasingly unstable. The letters grew darker, filled with threats and pleas for her to return to Paris, to him. The last letter hinted at a final meeting, after which Elise was never seen again. I felt a knot in my stomach as I realized the full extent of Lucien's obsession. He must have mistaken me for Elise, believing she had somehow returned. The thought of his twisted love and the lengths he might go to sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lucien was still out there in Paris, watching and waiting. Even scarier was not knowing what happened to my great aunt. The fear followed me, even in the safety of my home. I started receiving anonymous letters, each one more disturbing than the last. They were filled with proclamations of love and chilling reminders that he was always watching. One night, I awoke to the sound of breaking glass. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and called the police. I crept downstairs, my hands shaking. The living room window was shattered, and a cold breeze swept through the room. On the floor lay a letter, written in the same elegant handwriting. "Dear Elise, I have found you again. We will be together soon. Yours, eternally, Lucien." The police arrived and searched the house, but there was no sign of Lucien. They increased patrols in the area and advised me to stay with a friend or family member. I packed a bag and moved in with my mother, hoping the added security would keep me safe. I couldn't take it anymore. Me and my mom started investigating a little further. On one of the letters, we found his last name, Lucien Moreau, but we could find no updates on my great aunt. Her case was a closed case, with her last known whereabouts being her last trip to Paris. But why didn't the police check in with Lucien as a key suspect? I thought. After following up with the police, giving them my statement and evidence to proceed with pressing charges, there was one problem at hand. We needed to find Lucien, or at least catch him in the act. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to rebuild my life, but the fear never left me. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye made my heart race. I couldn't escape the feeling that Lucien was always near, watching and waiting. So I did what I could. I contacted the embassy. I figured if this delusional asshole was going to ruin my life, I wasn't going down without a fight. I didn't know then that once I made that call, my whole world would shatter in the most horrifying way. After getting the run around a bit and making several inquiries and a private detective, we found out a shitload of terrible things about Mr. Moreau. The worst was that Lucien Moreau was deceased. He had been gone for over 10 years. My mother and I sat in stunned silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on us. Somehow my visit to Paris triggered this man's spirit to come back and haunt me. We burned the letters quickly, trying to sever ties with this evil spirit. The private detective also looked into my great-aunt's now cold case. Elise was last seen at the same spot she and Lucien planned to meet at. He did something to her, and I know it. Lucien couldn't have Elise in life or death. His soul is cursed to wander the earth searching and longing for the love of his life, whom he took from this world before her time, a true tragedy. A few more weeks passed with me noticing no more strange occurrences. I found myself back to doing things I love to do, like photography. I decided to stay with my mom. That whole haunting situation was enough for me to realize I needed to be around family right now. Because sometimes when I'm alone, Lucien pops up in my mind, wondering if his spirit is in my corner watching me. One night, after dinner with my mom and a movie, tired and ready for bed, I made my way down the hall. I could feel something was off, but I shook it off, ready to get some sleep, so I could get up early for a new photography shoot offer I received. As I entered my room, I suddenly froze. Beside my window, there she was, a woman almost identical to me, smiling. The room was dark, but the moonlight was shining through the windows directly on her radiant form. My first instinct told me to scream. The energy said otherwise. I didn't feel afraid like I was seeing Lucien. I felt a sense of peace, and just like that, she was gone. I knew it was Elise. I hadn't seen Lucien anymore because she was now watching out for me in spirit. That visit was her telling me not to be afraid anymore.
My name is Mark, and I'm about to tell you the most terrifying story of my life. It all began when I inherited a vast piece of land from my late grandmother. Nestled deep in the heart of a secluded forest, this land had supposedly been in the family for generations, though I never knew about it. My wife, Emily, and I had always dreamed of living off the grid, away from the chaos of city life. This seemed like the perfect opportunity to build our dream homestead. The land was miles away from any neighbors, surrounded by dense woods and untouched nature. It was both beautiful and daunting. We spent weeks planning, drawing up blueprints and gathering materials. We even had family and friends pitch in to help us with our forever home. The excitement of starting a new chapter in our lives was palpable. We moved into a small trailer on the property and began the arduous task of building our home from the ground up. The first few days went smoothly. With a great team helping us, we cleared the land, laid the foundation, and started constructing the walls. But soon, things started to feel off. One morning, we woke up to find the walls we had built the previous day completely torn down. We were bewildered. Maybe a storm had passed through during the night. But the weather had been calm. We live on the property, so we would have known. We rebuilt the walls, this time ensuring they were sturdier. The next morning, they were down again. Like the first time, there were no signs of natural interference. It was as if someone or something was playing with us. Emily suggested we set up a camera to catch the culprit. I installed a few cameras all around the property, but they malfunctioned every night without explanation or a glimpse of what could be doing this. One evening, while exploring the property further, we stumbled upon eerie drawings carved into trees around the clearing where our house stood. The images were disturbing: satanic symbols, twisted faces, and cryptic messages in a language we didn't understand. The carvings were old but fresh enough to send chills down our spines. Some of the symbols had blood stained on them. We decided to ignore them, chalking it up to the work of vandals who might have passed through the area years ago. We had a home to build after all, and we couldn't let superstition derail our plans. So we thought. A few weeks later, as we were digging the trench for our septic system, Emily unearthed a creepy-looking doll. It was unlike any doll I'd ever seen, crafted from straw, bound together with twine, with a grotesque face painted in red. It looked ancient and malevolent. Emily wanted to burn it immediately, but I convinced her to keep it, thinking we might need to show it to the authorities if things got worse. We stashed it in a box and tried to move on. But that night we heard strange noises outside our trailer. Whispers, footsteps, and faint laughter. When we went to check, there was nothing there. Our unease grew by the day. We decided to call the local authorities, hoping they could provide some answers or at least patrol the area. When the officers arrived, they seemed skeptical, but agreed to search the property. As they combed through the woods, we followed, hoping to uncover the source of our troubles. About 3 miles from our clearing, we found an abandoned tent, torn and weathered by time. Inside, there were remnants of old camping gear and a notebook filled with disturbing sketches, similar to the ones we found carved into the trees. "Hey!" one of the officers called us over, his face pale and frozen with fear. Hanging from a tree nearby was the decapitated head of a pig, flies buzzing around it. The sight was grotesque and the stench was unbearable. The officers took pictures and gathered what little evidence they could, but they had no explanations. They promised to keep an eye on the area and left us with more questions than answers. Despite the officers' patrols, the disturbances continued. We found more satanic symbols drawn around our clearing, and the creepy doll reappeared on our doorstep multiple times, even after we threw it away. We were at our wits' end. One night, as we lay in bed, we heard a noise outside. A rustling, followed by a soft, sinister humming. Emily and I grabbed flashlights and cautiously stepped outside. The air was thick with tension. We scanned the clearing, and our beams of light fell on a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It was an old man, his face obscured by shadows. He was tall, dark, and gaunt, wearing tattered clothes. He didn't move, just stood there staring at us. We called out, but he didn't respond. Instead, he slowly raised his arm and pointed towards the trees. Then, without a sound, he vanished into the darkness. Desperate for answers, We decided to search through my grandmother's old belongings, hoping to find some news about the land's history. In her basement, we found an old journal hidden in a worn chest. As we read through it, we discovered that my grandmother had written about strange occurrences on the property. She mentioned rituals, dark figures in the woods, and a pact with something she called the Way Watcher. According to her journal, the Way Watcher was an ancient spirit bound to the land, demanding sacrifices to keep the forest and its inhabitants safe. Those who defied it would suffer its wrath. My grandmother had apparently tried to appease it for years, but as she grew older, she stopped, and the disturbances began again. So why the fuck would she pass this curse on to me and my family? I thought, holding back the tears, anger, and frustration. Armed with this knowledge, we decided to confront the Way Watcher. We found the spot in the woods that seemed to be the center of the activity, a clearing with an ancient stone altar. Following my grandmother's notes, we prepared a ritual to try and communicate with the Way Watcher, hoping to end the nightmare. As we performed the ritual, the air grew cold, and a dense fog enveloped us. The forest grew eerily silent. Then a figure emerged from the mist, the same old man we had seen before. He approached us slowly, and as he drew closer, his features became more defined. His eyes were hollow, and his skin was like parchment stretched over bone. He spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from another realm. "You have trespassed on sacred ground. Leave, or face the consequences." We pleaded with him, explaining that we just wanted to build a home, raise our children, and live in peace. The figure seemed to ponder this for a moment, then said, "The land requires balance, a life for a life. Only then will you find peace." We were horrified. The Way Watcher demanded a sacrifice, but neither of us could fathom taking a life. As we stood there, paralyzed by fear and indecision, "We will leave," I said, instantly. Emily gave me a look I will never forget. She stepped forward. "I'll stay," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll live here. I'll maintain the balance in the land." Tears streamed down my face as I begged her not to do it, but she was resolute. The Way Watcher nodded, and the fog began to lift. "The balance will now be maintained," he said, before disappearing into the woods. Emily stayed behind, tending to the land and keeping the Way Watcher appeased. I visit her often, but the place never feels like home. The disturbances stopped, and the land became eerily calm. The authorities never found any more evidence of foul play, and the case was closed. I was torn inside knowing I had gotten my wife stuck into all this. I still live with the guilt of what happened every day, and the memory of that old man haunts my dreams. The land may be ours, but it came at a terrible price. Our dream of an off-grid homestead turned into a twisted nightmare, and we learned that some inheritances are better left untouched. A couple of months ago, I was in my dining room, enjoying my usual quiet morning. As I glanced out the window to take in the glorious sunshine, I happened to see my neighbor, who's about the same age as me, mid-30s, staring out his bedroom window with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I thought it was strange, but decided to brush it off and went about my day. A couple of weeks later, I saw him doing it again. This time, I followed his gaze and realized he was looking into my bedroom. Our houses are maybe 20 feet apart, so it wasn't hard to figure out. Curiosity and a sense of unease gnawed at me, so I went upstairs to see what was happening. As I opened the bedroom door, I saw my wife naked getting ready for the day. I looked over at his house, and there was a glare on the window across the way. I walked right over to our window, cupped my hands around my eyes, and crouched before I could see into his room. No one was there. My wife, noticing my strange behavior, asked, "What's going on?" I told her about the guy peeping at her. She was obviously flummoxed, and I offered to go talk to him, demand he stop doing that. She hesitated. "No, don't do that. I'll just make sure the drapes are closed next time." It was her body, so yeah, if that's how she wanted to handle it, I couldn't complain. But I planned to not be neighborly anymore. A few days later, I saw my wife leave the room after getting ready, and she hadn't closed the curtain. She laughed it off and said she forgot. Then 2 days ago, I saw the neighbor again, in his window from my dining room window. I rushed upstairs, and sure enough, my wife was naked in front of the window again. I couldn't see the neighbor in his room, but I knew he was just there minutes ago. I said, "Fuck this, I'm going to go have at him." "Or maybe we should file charges," I asked my wife. My wife insisted yet again and said she wanted to do it herself. She went over there and I didn't know what to expect. I looked out the window a few minutes later and saw them laughing about something, with relaxed body language. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it seemed like they were having a casual conversation. My heart sank. I didn't understand why she was so calm about getting peeped, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had to get this off my chest. I don't know if my wife believed me, but she was so damn cool about constantly being watched, and I didn't understand why. That night my nerves wouldn't let me rest, so I decided to stay up late and keep an eye on things. At around midnight, I saw a shadow move past my window. My heart pounded as I crept towards the window, trying to see who or what it was. It was him, of course, the neighbor, walking around his yard, staring up at our house with a look of horror on his face. I was beyond livid at this point, and thinking out loud, I'm about to be in handcuffs if this man keeps coming after my wife. The next day I installed cameras around the house, hoping to catch him in the act. I reviewed the footage every night, but it was always the same, shadows, glimpses of movement, but nothing concrete. My paranoia grew, and I started seeing him everywhere. In the grocery store, at the park, even driving past me on the road. One evening, as I was reviewing the footage, I noticed something strange. The cameras had caught him standing in his window staring into ours, but his expression was different. He looked scared. Confused, I zoomed in and saw my wife standing in our bedroom, waving at him with a smile. I confronted her about it, but she just laughed it off, saying she was trying to scare him away. "It's working, isn't it?" she said with a smirk. But I wasn't convinced. There was something in her eyes, a glint of mischief, that made me uneasy. My wife's reaction to this whole ordeal was making me start to question her sanity. That night, I couldn't sleep yet again. I kept replaying the footage in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise outside. I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I walked around the house, shining the flashlight into the darkness. Suddenly, I saw him. He was standing by the fence, looking at me with wide eyes. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I stood there, my heart pounding, unsure of what to do. The next day, my wife was unusually cheerful. She hummed to herself as she went about her morning routine, almost as if nothing had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from me. I decided to confront her once and for all. "Honey, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up at me with a smile. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I took a deep breath. "I need to know what's going on with you and our neighbor. Why are you so calm about all of this?" She sighed and put down her coffee cup. "Okay, I'll tell you the truth. I went over there to confront him, but he wasn't what I expected. He was scared, in fact, he was frightened. He said he's been seeing things, strange things, and he thinks our house is haunted." I stared at her in disbelief. I chuckled. "Haunted? What are you talking about?" She nodded. "He told me that ever since we moved in, he's been seeing shadows and hearing voices. He thought it was us, that we were spying on him, but now he's convinced it's something else." "Gotta be fucking kidding me," I said. "No way this guy has been peeping my wife. Now he wants to feed us some BS ghost story." I didn't know what to think. Was my wife and him playing some kind of twisted game? Or was there really something sinister going on? That night, I decided to set up the cameras inside the house, hoping to catch him in the act causing the disturbances. Around midnight, I sat in front of the monitors, watching the live feed. At first, everything was normal, but then I saw it. A shadow moved across the living room, followed by a faint whispering sound. My heart raced as I leaned closer to the screen. The shadow moved through the hallway to our bedroom where my wife was sleeping. I watched the shadow standing by my wife, just watching her. I grabbed a flashlight and rushed upstairs. As I approached the bedroom, I saw the shadow now standing by the window, looking out at the neighbor's house. I froze, unable to move. The shadow turned towards me, and I felt a cold breeze wash over me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it dissolved into the air, leaving me standing there, trembling. I rushed to the window and looked out, hoping to see the neighbor. But he wasn't there this time. The street was empty, shrouded in darkness. The next morning, my wife found me exhausted, sitting in the living room, eyes red and swollen from staring at the monitors all night. "Did you see anything?" she asked, her voice soft. "Honey, you should take a break from all this and get some rest," she said. I nodded in agreement, unable to speak. She sat down beside me and took my hand. "We need to talk to him," she said. "We need to figure out what's really going on." This was the first actual bit of concern she has showed since it all started. Reluctantly, I agreed. We went over to the neighbor's house that afternoon. He answered the door. We both locked eyes for a moment, each of us looking tired and scared. We sat down in his living room. He glanced around the room as if someone else was there watching and listening, but it was just us. He began to tell us his story. He had moved in his house a few months before us and had started seeing strange things almost immediately. Shadows, whispers, and the feeling of being watched. He said he thought it was us at first, but then he realized it was something else, whatever. Or whoever it was. It had a connection to both our houses. However, the spirit's real infatuation was with my wife. Chills went down my spine when the neighbor explained with an eerie look on his face. "I was never watching your wife," he said. "I just so happened to catch the spirit watching your wife," he said. My eyeballs widened and felt as though I was about to choke on my own saliva as sheer terror ran through my body. As bad as I wanted to pulverize my neighbor for seeing my wife's goodies, he was telling the truth, and I knew it because I saw it too. By the end of our conversation, my wife was in tears. I couldn't help but think of how cool she was when we thought Buddy was peeping her. "Oh, it's not okay now because it's a freaking ghost, huh?" I thought, still a bit angry from it all. I had had enough, and this wasn't a fight I was prepared for. Another man I could deal with, but spirits, ghosts, and ghouls I could not. 2 days later, we packed up everything, moved and never looked back. We never again saw our old neighbor after the move, and when I think about it, I would hate to see him ever again.